Hi, I'm David Warhol, producer of Saturn Bug, and you're listening to the SEGA Lounge.
Welcome to the SEGA Lounge, a podcast dedicated to our love for all things Sega, be it the games, the music, or the community. I'm KC. In each episode, I'll be talking to different guests and sharing their projects and their passion for Sega. Welcome back to the SEGA Lounge, everyone. I hope you're well and you had a wonderful week. Last week we had a somewhat different episode covering Sonic Colors Ultimate. If you missed that, do check it out and feel free to share your own thoughts on the game as well by tweeting at the SEGA Lounge. I also wanted to give a shout out to our friends over at Sega Powered Magazine who just got successfully funded over on Kickstarter with 441 backers pledging over £12,700. That's amazing, and I'm really excited to flick through the first issue of this brand new Sega magazine very soon. But enough chit-chat, it's time to talk about this week's guest. And boy, oh boy, do we have a great guest for you. This week, I am very excited to share with you guys my conversation with video game industry legend David Warhol. Mr. Warhol was a programmer during the early Intellivision days, founded Realtime Associates, and with RTA created several games for Sega consoles, including Bug and its sequel Bug 2. As you can probably tell by listening to our conversation, I was delighted to learn more about his career, his stories about a different time in the industry, and how Realtime Associates was originally supposed to make a 3D Sonic game for the Saturn. That and much more coming up next on the SEGA Lounge. Hello, Mr. David Warhol. Welcome to the SEGA Lounge. How are you?
Oh, fantastic! Thanks for having me. I always enjoy hearing people who have interest in this era of gaming.
It's a pleasure, a very big honor to have you on the show. Just to start us off with a cool, interesting fact. So I was talking to a listener the other day, and we were talking about our love for a specific game that you worked on, Bug 2.
Oh.
And I thought to myself, I need to get the people behind Bug on the show. I don't know why I never did that. So that's what got me thinking I need to get in touch with David and try to get him on the show. But in fact, your career is much more interesting than just Bug, which is a great game. But we'll get to that, I'm sure. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your background as just like a gamer, and what got you into video games, not as a developer or a producer, but as a player or even interested in that world?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. My history goes way back. I mean, I'm a first generation guy, so I was kind of exploring video games before video games even existed. I want to say I was a big pinball player as a kid, and I remember going into an arcade once and seeing the game that's Computer Space and being blown away by that and saying, "Wow, this is a pinball machine, but it's a TV set." And would go specifically to play that. And then, of course, as more and more games came out, I was attracted to the interactive nature of the early arcade games. And At that time, my high school had a connection to the school district's computer with a really old 300 baud teletype kind of thing. And in high school, I was programming games, but the only interface was through a text keyboard. So I'd done a couple of computer games, but that ran on a terminal.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time I got into college, there were more arcade machines out. We had them in the student union, was playing them a lot. And I remember one day actually ditching a class to go to an arcade to play games, not realizing that actually was more important to my career than whatever the class was I was ditching, I guess. Um, and by the time I
Were you?
was,
Sorry to interrupt. Were you taking anything related to computers or in college or?
no, I went to Pomona College. It's a liberal arts college, and at the time they didn't have a computer program at all. Again, they had access to a campus computer that we could again use through terminals. But I never took any formal programming classes. It was self-taught. I used the Apple computer, just programming that in assembly language for like a psych professor wanted to do some experiments, and I was coding for that. But it wasn't until I went to Mattel Electronics that I really started coding games completely in assembly language. From before that, it was either Fortran or BASIC, whatever we could use in our online computers.
Mhm. So it wasn't. So you really ditching the class was really more important to your career than because you
Yeah.
weren't learning anything related to what you ended up doing.
Well, yeah, to what I ended up doing. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that was the first step into this world of what we now know as video games, right?
Hmm.
Um, when did you realize that was going to be your career, your what you wanted to
Well,
do?
yeah. After I graduated from my college, I graduated with a degree in music, which I feel had some influence on my career, not just doing sound effects and music for early games, but that level of kind of creative structural analysis of this is a, either this is a symphony or this is a piece of art. What's the structure? What's the form? How's it develop? I feel that some of those themes carried through to my game design and game development career. But I was working for the college for a year after I graduated. And at that time, we received notice from Mattel Electronics, famously Don Daglow, who also went to my college. He had sent a job opening to the school, and it landed on my desk in the computer department, at the computer services department. And I was supposed to post it for the seniors, and I was like, "What? Post this? No, I'm going to apply for this." I did actually post it, but I also applied and got the job there. So it wasn't until graduating that the opportunity to get into computer games opened itself up, and I didn't know how to develop them, but I told myself, well, if anybody can, I can figure it out. They can tell me how to do it, and I'm game.
Okay, so what was your? Do you remember even your first project there?
Oh gosh. So when we started at Mattel, it was kind of a cube farm like you see in the movie Tron, right? Just 60 or 70 cubes all spread out. They literally gave me a manual for how to use the Intellivision and access to a programming station, and said, spend a week or two teaching yourself how to do this. So it wasn't a training program or anything like that, but they did have a sample code base that you could start developing. And the way I taught myself how to program, well, for the Intellivision, but also for games, I developed an original game concept I've been thinking about that was based on Stratego, which I played a lot as a kid. And this came to be known as Mind Strike. And what I did over those 2 or 3 weeks was to get a prototype board up, get some pieces moving. And then at the end of my training period, I wrote up a memo that said, "Hey, I'd like to propose that I complete this game." And people took a look at it. It went upstairs, and they said, "Yeah, let's run with it." So my first game was of my own device, born out of a training project. And I think I still have in one of my boxes. I still have that memo of me proposing to do that game.
So it was that easy to get ideas across at the time, right? So just write
Yeah,
up a memo and people were open to new ideas.
it's a small department, and gosh, there wasn't a lot of precedent. They were doing a lot of sports games, but they had all those handled. And then they were doing arcade ripoffs. They would look at something like Centipede or Tempest and say, "Oh, well, we got to do a game like this." Or Astro Smash literally is
Mhm.
asteroids. And I guess either they didn't have a project to attach me to, or, "Oh, that seems different enough. Perhaps we should try that." Mattel had different, like the strategy network and the sports network and the arcade network, and I think they figured, "Oh, we can put this over in the strategy network or what have you," because they were doing some board games, but this one was unique in that it was a real time board game
Hmm.
where the pieces moved at the same time. Like imagine playing chess, but you didn't have to take turns, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So that's great. That's great. And it's brilliant that your first, like your training project became your first real project. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah,
And
I
so
was delighted.
and intriguingly enough, your training was by yourself, right? So mostly by yourself. So you're still a self-taught, as you were before, programmer, developer at
Well,
this time.
at that time, there were no formal ways to learn how to develop games, and I remember even
Yeah.
10 years later, I was at dinner with Rich Hilleman, Electronic Arts, and EA had been growing and all this, and it was right at the
Mhm.
time when Hollywood was trying to do games, and games were trying to do Hollywood. And his point at that time was, Dave, we can do Hollywood better than Hollywood can do games. Why? Because I can walk into a bookstore and I can see 100 books on how to make games, and they can't walk into a bookstore and see one book on how to make video games. Oh,
Mhm.
oh yeah,
So
yeah.
how to make
Make
movies,
movies, yes, yeah,
and they can, yeah, that
exactly, yeah,
I got
yeah,
it. That's true. That's true. Yeah. So it was fairly new, right? It is still fairly new when we compare it to other art forms, even though
yeah,
we look at the advancements and the innovation that we got over the past few decades. But it's still a fairly new medium,
yeah. Yeah,
if you
well,
will.
given the life of other creative media, and especially in the indie game scene, right, where
Mhm.
really it's a small project that can push some boundaries or express themselves creatively in that way.
Yeah, yeah. Excellent. Very good. That's very, very interesting. So at some point, you decided to create Real-Time Associates, right? So you were.
Yeah, that was many years later.
Mhm.
I worked at Mattel for a year and a half. The electronics division uh, uh, shut down in the video game bust of, I want to say, '84. Everybody's laid off. Interestingly enough, though, computer games were starting to take off at that time, and many of some of the management continued their career in computer games. Now, also, while I was programming Intellivision games, I was an avid computer game player as well. Yeah, I'd play arcade games and some console games, but really I was looking at like the Infocom adventures and stuff like that, having a lot of fun with those. So as when the video game market crashed, I started then working in music and sounds for computer games, which was just taking off. That was Commodore 64, the Amiga. Uh, PCs only had one sound card to develop for, and it was, no DVDs or CDs or anything like that. And so then I was keeping my hat in the ring, but instead of doing one project every 6 months, or these computer game designers would take 9 months to do a pretty epic game, I'd be coming in and out every 1 or 2 months to do some music and sounds. So I was able to be exposed to a vast level of architectures and kind of designers, and so I really built a portfolio of technology at that time, because I was working on the Amiga and the Commodore 64 and the Atari 400, 800, and all of these different machines.
So you mentioned something that I usually talk to people who were developing games at that time, composers, whatnot. There were a lot of limitations with the hardware at the time, right?
Oh,
Do you
holy cow!
think? Yeah, tell me about it, right? So, but do you think that we usually get to the same conclusion every time that limitations spark creativity? So, do you think you were more creative yourself because you had to work around those limitations as well?
Yeah, but creative use of technology. The games were extraordinarily small, right? 4 kilobytes, 8 kilobytes. And it became important to be creative with programming techniques to maximize the kind of the payout of the game experience. So we pushed the limits of what the technology would do, is where the creativity really came into it. And there's this a kind of a law that I've coined. It's kind of like Moore's law, right? Moore's law is every 18 months, technology doubles or halves in cost, whatever that is, and that's why we have so much memory. There's another ratio that I find really interesting, which is the number of hours of gameplay of a game divided by the size of the game. And so if you expect 20 hours out of a game that's only 4 kilobytes, that means that each byte of memory represents something like 2.8 minutes of play or whatever the math is. I don't have it in front of me. But then you get a 64K game that you expect to be 20 hours with. Well, gosh, the memory isn't as important. And by the time you get to a DVD size of 4 gigabytes, that maybe you've got 80 hours of gameplay in it instead of just 20.
Mhm.
It's still now you've got 3.5 meg per minute or what have you. And so I like to say that the bytes were very precious back then because you had to express them in ways to entertain. Where instead of just throwing data at the problem or throwing graphics at the problem, you really needed to figure out how to entertain in very little resource.
Yeah, yeah, because you had to allot this amount of memory to this part of the game, to graphics, to music, to whatever. So
Mm-hmm.
you couldn't just like
Yeah.
waste all that precious memory in doing whatever.
And I'd like to say that over the first maybe 10 years of my career, I still use that as a mandate. Once we got CDs, it wasn't like, okay, well, now we don't have to be efficient. It was like, no, what happens if we bring efficiency to this level of storage? Imagine how much more we could put in here than our competitors or than other people by maximizing it. Or, there's still a certain amount of bandwidth it would take to
Mhm.
stream off the disk. Well, let's compress them in a way that we can get more off the disk at a time. Still looking at these larger resources as scarce resources. And
Yeah,
I got to say now it's not as relevant in development nowadays, but it's still a point of optimization.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Now we get like dozens of gigs per
Oh
game,
yeah.
and people complain that they need to, if they buy the games digitally, they need to spend some hours or something downloading the game, downloading patches and stuff. So we always complain about
When I
everything.
first got Half Life, I got it online, and I said they called it Half Life because it's taken half my life to download the dang thing.
Yeah. So yeah, everyone always likes to complain about
Hmm.
whatever. Yeah, we complain about what annoys us at the time, but that changes.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were mentioning your career, and you've done a lot of amazing things. So Real-Time Associates, why and
Uh,
how did that happen?
Yeah. So I was doing music and sounds again for a number of for a lot of EA, some Interplay, some Lucasfilm games at the time, and then I had the opportunity to. There was a entrepreneur who used to work at Mattel Electronics who bought the Mattel product line, and we were connected, and he asked me to start generating new games or updating old games. He was taking all the sports games and enhancing them and calling it the Super Pro line of Intellivision games, whatever. Um, I started working doing Intellivision games again, bringing together a group of ex Mattel programmers who were familiar with it. We built our own development stations because there weren't any at the time, and that was the genesis of Real-Time Associates, was getting these ex Mattel guys together. It was all virtual, no office. Everybody's working at home,
Mhm.
but they're very small teams: one lead programmer, one graphic artist, and then me, either design, producer, audio guy, tester. So we were able to make that work. So Real-Time Associates started that way, and then eventually we reverse engineered the 8-bit Nintendo to um, to offer services on that, and it probably was around then that I actually got an office and started bringing in people real into a real physical studio.
So that's interesting. So you've reversed engineered the NES, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
at the
There was no
time,
documentation.
there was no dev kit, there was no nothing, right? So
Well,
if you
there
wanted
were
to,
dev kits. There were dev kits if you were an official Nintendo developer, you could get an
exactly.
official Nintendo developer kit. But at this time, all the development was being done in Japan. And I didn't even think they were going to open it up to third party developers. So
Mm.
honestly, we just sat on the tech for a couple of years until we started noticing games being developed in the United States. And like, holy cow, missed that bandwagon. But we had built our own ROM emulators for the Intellivision, so we adapted those to the 6502 and the Nintendo bus. And then without even realizing it, we needed to become third-party developers. We were third-party developers and probably released 3 or 4 games before Nintendo goes, wait a second, these guys aren't licensed developers. What's going on here?
So you guys actually developed and released NES games or without
Oh
a
yeah,
license?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Without a license, yeah. I didn't know I
Okay.
needed one. They didn't know I didn't have one. They just got the games from the publisher who sent them in. And this came to light kind of famously, notoriously, and I'm a little embarrassed to say, on one of our biggest releases, Maniac Mansion for Jalico. Um, a tremendous engineering effort. I think we did a pretty good job. Still, the wavy line at the bottom of the screen kind of bothers me, but I don't think the Nintendo was really designed to do that. Um, but not knowing how to initialize their cartridge memory controller, we released a version of the game and they manufactured hundreds of thousands of units that didn't correctly initialize the controller because we were testing on dev cards and stuff like that. And they when they plugged the cartridges in, they didn't work. It's just $8-10 a cartridge. They blew a couple $1 million in inventory. Fortunately, it turned out that all they needed to do was wipe the RAM that was on the card, make sure the RAM was initialized, and then the whole thing worked just fine. But that's when it came out that, oh, well, I don't know how to program this thing. Well, didn't you look in the specs? I don't have the specs. you know,
So the Maniac Mansion was released as an unlicensed game for the NES. Is that
it
what you're
was
saying?
no, it was well, Jalico licensed it from Lucasfilm Games, and
Okay.
then Realtime Associates was the developer of it. So it was published by Jalico, but we had a great collaboration with Ron Gilbert, the Scum guys.
Mm.
Um, we kind of built a Scum engine that ran on the Nintendo, and yeah, so yeah, that was one
So
of ours.
it
But
was the issue here was you didn't have access to the original the spec lists, the all
yeah, the
the
parts lists,
documentation, the
yeah,
parts lists. So
yeah,
yeah, so yeah,
yeah.
okay, yeah, that's very interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
Every time there's a history of video game book, I thumb through it to say, please, let's make sure they didn't bring this up. So hey, this is maybe a scoop me on this one now.
Your secret's safe with us. No one's listening. It's just you and
Okay,
me.
yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah,
Just
yeah, yeah.
don't tell anybody.
No one's listening. Don't. Yeah. Okay. So, and at some point, so I think obviously this is a Sega podcast, so people listening to us associate you with Sega and with games released on Sega platforms.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, I believe there was like a very close collaboration between you guys and Sega, right?
Mm-hmm.
How did
Yeah.
that come to be? How did that happen and start at the time?
Well, I want to say, let's see, we were developing a lot for the Nintendo platforms, was our predominant, the Super Nintendo and the 8-bit Nintendo. But I had an agent out there, Paul Kohler, who was in contact with all the publishers on their needs and things like that. So he had a relationship with Sega. I think as a test game, they gave us Ren and Stimpy for the Game Gear. And that was one of the, I don't want to say earliest things. Well, certainly it's the first thing we did for Sega.
Mhm.
Um, and that went well. And so then they also then tested us with Barney the Dinosaur on the Genesis. And Jesse Taylor was the producer of that. And this is when Barney was becoming very popular with kids and very annoying to adults. So I'm sure it was really hard for him to get that through. But his vision for the game was brilliant. He wanted to, hey, if my older brother or sister has a Genesis console system, let's get something for the 3-year-old that he can play as well. He or she can play as well. And I thought it was a great concept. And his idea of, well, because Barney is all about affirmation and all this, you don't even need to play the game. It'll just, if you let go of the controller, it'll just play itself. And so we did that one. And I think the rapport that we built with Jesse on how we executed his vision and how we worked together as a team, I think is what really solidified our relationship into Sega. And we were talking about doing Bug. We had pitched Bug as a Genesis cartridge, kind of as a wonky Sonic. But so by then, I think we had a pretty good relationship with Sega. I'm not sure of the timing of their Pico platform, but we did a tremendous amount of work for them on the Pico. So they looked at us as a reliable and valued supplier.
And you released some licensed games there as well, right? So
Oh
Disney,
yeah,
even there's a Tales game that you guys, Tales in
yeah.
the Music
Tales,
Maker, you guys worked on that
Pocahontas,
too. Lion
Lion King.
King.
I had some Lion King animation cells up here, which is funny because they didn't make animation cells. But what we did was for the book, we had to make animation cells. We got licensed artists and cell painters and got them approved through Disney. So I don't think any actual Lion King cells exist because that was when they first started digitally painting it, except I've got 3 up over here.
Excellent.
Um, so
So
around that time, oh yeah, please
mhm.
go ahead.
No. Yeah, you keep going. So I think
No,
you were
yeah,
saying that you collaborated with
yeah,
them on the
that,
Pico as well, and then there
yeah.
was the Saturn came up, I believe.
The Saturn came out. They were starting to develop for the Saturn, and we were selected as one of 6 developers, which they called the Tiger Team. And this is, Jesse brought us in, and he might have had another developer there, and I'm not sure who the other ones were. I remember Jeff Spangenberg's company was one of them. Um, and this was a year before the launch of the Saturn, and they didn't even have development systems yet. But they had specs. They said, this is what it's going to look like. And they signed us up to actually do a 3D Sonic game. That's how Bugs started, was Sega of America signed a contract with Realtime Associates. It's the biggest one we had to date to do a Sonic game. And so we started development in good faith. And about 2 weeks after the contract was signed, we moved forward. Um, Sega of Japan found out, what? You gave an American developer Sonic? No. And so all of a sudden the rug was pulled out from under us on the Sonic game. So here we had this contract to do a 3D action game, but no lead character. And we were
Mhm.
concerned at the time. Um, but also, I think it was the day I signed the contract with their VP, and Jesse Taylor was there, that he said, "Oh, I'm leaving the company. Really glad to have worked with you, but I've got another opportunity somewhere else." And so all of a sudden, our connection with Jesse wasn't there, who I knew was our champion. But
Mhm.
in his place, Steve Apur of Sega fame was now our producer. And as in those weeks we were trying to figure out what to do, we sent Steve our sketches for Bug that we had done for Jesse for the
For the
Genesis.
Mega Drive, yeah, for the Genesis, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so Steve, then recognizing that he championed this inside Sega, saying, you know what? If we give them a license or a character, they're going to do an okay job. But if we let them do an original, they're just going to take off, and they're going to be on fire internally, as well as, instead of just filling out a bill of goods, they're going to be really committed and vested in this. So Steve got them to sign off on an original character game for us, which ended up being Bug,
Mhm.
and then we were off to the races.
Okay. So obviously people will be like, so had heard this before, but for people who hadn't, was the final product Bug what you intended the Sonic 3D project to be like in terms of gameplay? Not, I know aesthetically it was probably very different. It had to you had to comply with Sega's vision of Sonic and stuff, but was that in terms of gameplay what you intended Sonic to be like on the Saturn?
No, with Sonic on the Saturn would have been much, the pacing of Sonic, and honestly, we'd been pushing the Saturn a lot harder. I think we might have even wanted to develop a 3D Sonic model, which it would have played out in real time, which would have been pretty challenging in the early days of the Saturn. So it's really the pacing, the sense of humor, and the it wasn't until after Bug was released that it got described as a quad scroller instead of a side scroller. We had done
Okay.
just a ton of side scrollers. The fact you could go in and out of the screen and what have you was, I don't think it would have been as regimented with Sonic. I think we'd have seen a lot more curves and things like that. I think
Mhm.
Sonic would have still been on rails. And I was a big proponent of Bug being on rails, even though it was a 3D game. I felt the need for the determination or the certainty of collision interactions. I didn't want to be messing with
Mhm.
collision planes on 3 dimensions. Two is enough. And so having them come in and out of the track, if you look at it, it's still a 2D game, but it's expressed in 3D. But all of the collisions, all the gameplays only takes place in 2D at once, and that's what the market was used to. That's what people were experiencing in other games.
Mhm.
So I felt strongly that we needed to keep it that way.
Excellent. Yeah, yeah. That would have been interesting. So we're gonna take a quick break soon, but let me just so we don't lose our train of thought.
Yeah.
You mentioned you were pitching a game for the Genesis. Bug was originally a Genesis game, and then you were surprised as everyone else that the Saturn would be coming out soon. What were your thoughts at the time, knowing what the market was like? Did you think that was the right move to move to the Saturn? Were you a fan of the 32X and Mega CD or Sega CD combo? Do you think that was a mistake? What were your thoughts living in those days inside the industry and having this relationship with Sega?
No comment. No, 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 no. Sega at that time was at one time they had 8 or so platforms, all either in development or trying to launch in the market, and I don't know whose idea that was, but to have so many devices that tried to address so many segments of the market. You walk onto a car lot, and no matter how much money you have to spend, they've got a model of car for you, and you keep upping that, and then you get to the price point of the next model up, but with no features. And so that's some sort of car lot mentality, which was impossible to sustain given the size of the video game market and the amount of manufacturing and inventory they needed to do. They had way too many platforms. I mean, the
Mhm.
32X, I'd heard, was devised because they had bought too many of a certain type of processor and they just needed to get rid of them, or they had a contract with Hitachi, is the SH1. And so those were some difficult platforms to really fully take advantage of. And we never developed for the 32X. We never developed for the Sega CD. And so there was really a around that time. I'm not sure of the exact timing of it, but yeah, they had way too many platforms, and I think that was part of what made it difficult for them to support the Saturn the way that might have helped them hold up against the PlayStation.
Mhm.
There
Yeah.
was one famous day that I'll always remember in my studio when we had access to the Saturn way before the PlayStation came out, and once we got our first PlayStation development kit, we we were cross-platform programmers. We like to do games on multiple platforms. We did a very simple sprite test of, all right, let's just have bouncing balls on the screen and let's see how many we can run at 60 frames a second. And the Saturn got up to 800, and as soon as we got to 810 or 820, chug down to 30 frames a second. And then we did the same test on the PlayStation, and it was like 2400 before it started chugging. And then we were like, holy cow, this this is that's the A, how do we develop to maximize both platforms? But B, we've got the relationship with Sega and the inside track and all this, and with Sony, that's either a new platform, a new relationship for us. So we realized we were in with the underdog as far as the technology went,
Hmm.
and then as you look at games being developed for the PlayStation, they were able to take advantage of that in ways that was not possible on the Saturn,
Hmm.
even using both processors at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. So people usually say that the Saturn, the approach to the Saturn was not the best. People were all about the 3D at the time, and the Saturn was not the best for 3D games, right? So the 2D is where the platform shines. But
Yeah, and then again, going back to the limitations of technology, how do you make the most out of limited technology? And Bug, I think it is pretty widely known now. Though we developed all of the characters in 3D modeling software, we took still pictures of them and ran them as animated sprites in 3D space. So because it would have been too much CPU power to try to drive all of those 3D models in the even with both processors. And another thing I like to say about Bug is that the Saturn had two SH1 or SH2 processors. SH1, it had two processors, but you needed to figure out how to get them to operate without stepping on one another.
Mhm.
And because we were so focused on the fun, the gameplay factor, how can we make this thing great? The first thing the first processor did was turn off the second processor, and then we ran the whole game on the first processor, which worked just fine because we weren't trying to do that 3D rendering. I mean, the
Mhm.
backgrounds were all 3D rendered; but that's where we chose to put the power of the graphics chips and all that.
Mm. Excellent. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing, David. That's very interesting. A very interesting insight. A fun fact for you. So I'm from Portugal, and in Portugal, the Saturn for a couple of years, perhaps, was much bigger than the PlayStation,
Mm.
which I think is not the same that happened all around the world, but because it had Sega had such a big presence during the 16-bit days.
Hmm.
Nintendo was nowhere to be seen almost, so it was all Sega, and people were really big fans of the company, and everyone was on board with the Saturn, even though
Hmm.
later the Saturn stopped, we stopped getting new games. So but I think that's part of why, for example, Bug 2, and other Saturn games are such beloved parts of video game history here in Portugal, and for some of our listeners as well. But
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I understand Europe was a completely different thing than America, and we would do PAL versions of the games, but basically because it's 50 hertz rather than 60 hertz, they kind of suffered by being a little slower,
Yeah.
or if you increase the gameplay speed, there were technical problems where objects could move through boundaries where they had been tested not to. So it was
Mm.
difficult to master, but yeah, and appreciate that the people in Europe rode the Genesis, uh, the Saturn, and the Sega wave.
Mhm. Yeah. I remember when I first heard, and first played, but heard the soundtrack to Sonic games in 60 hertz. It blew my mind because it was much slower. But yeah,
Oh, I
fun
mean that
times.
that does remind me of the music for Bug, which I absolutely adore. I had been trying to do music and sounds for my own games as I was producing them in my company, but as it grew, there just wasn't enough time to do the job I wanted to do. Brought in a composer who had done film and television scoring, and it was like, dude, you want to work on three square waves in a 4 octave range? What's going on? He said, no, I want to do this. Greg Turner. And what a brilliant composer, and he was able to take the limitations of these machines. But when we first had a concept, okay, what do we want? What do we want? But the soundtrack for Bug to sound like? We came up with Pink Panther on speed, and then he went into his composing studio for, I don't know, a day or two, and he came back and he played me the rush of how he thought this game should sound, and I was floored. I absolutely loved it. Now, the soundtrack was slightly altered in the game as it was released, but if you can find the Sega CD, I forget what it's called. There's a audio CD released that Sega released, that has music from all of the games of that era, the Saturn
Hmm.
games especially. There's a piece, the last one on the album is called Bug Bop, and
Yep.
that is the tune that Greg wrote to pitch for the the sound. And man, I mean, I still get chills down my spine as he's doing all these little xylophone runs and comedic stuff. It's just I love that soundtrack.
Okay, so let's take a quick break, so we can clear our throats, and, and we'll be right back with more with David Warhol. This week, our 60-second game segment is back, and for the first time with a 1-minute pitch by one of our listeners. In fact, you may hear me mentioning him throughout this show, since it was a chat with the amazing João Pardal that inspired me to track down David Warhol. João is also getting the SEGA Lounge prize for sending me his 60-second game. Remember, you can also take part by sending me a good quality recording of your 60-second pitch of a SEGA game you love. Recordings that I play on the show will get a TSL prize. Anyway, here is João Pardal with his game.
Hi, my name is João Pardal and I am here to talk about Bug 2. Bug 2, with an exclamation point at the end, is the sequel of the 1995 Sega Saturn game simply titled Bug, also with an exclamation point at the end. In this game, you can control one of three zany characters: Bug, Maggot Dog, or Superfly. You will travel through 6 different worlds, and each one of them is inspired by famous movies. Instead of their real names, each world has its very own humorous pun, like Weevil Dead or Fleawy's Big Adventure. Bug 2 is played like a traditional side-scroller platformer, but it has some 3D elements. It's also filled with secret areas ready to be discovered by the player. To sum it up, Bug 2 is a very unique Sega game with a very distinctive personality. Believe me, it's totally worth it.
Welcome back, David. Welcome back to the Sega Lounge. Hope you're well and ready.
Yep. Having fun.
You're saying yep, and saying having fun, but you don't know what's coming up. So here's the thing. There's a tradition here on the Sega Lounge. When I have guests, which is every week, basically, I always like to play a little game with them. It's a game, but it's actually called the Sega Lounge Challenge.
Now that you know our guests, it's time to put them to the test. It's the moment we've waited for and the moment they dread.
Welcome to your doom.
I mean, welcome to the SEGA Lounge Challenge.
What is the SEGA Lounge Challenge? I wish listeners could look at your face right now. See your face and yeah, the fear. So the SEGA Lounge Challenge can be pretty much anything I want, but this time I thought you are a video game industry legend. Um, you worked on games, and your company worked on games for various Sega systems. So how well do you know um, games for Sega systems? Doesn't have to be your games, but can you identify from just a basic, quick description of the game? Can you identify the game, even if it's one of yours or
Okay.
not?
That's so, yeah, as a disclaimer, I'm so focused on our own stuff. Yeah, I might not have been playing everything else that came out of the studio, but okay.
We'll see. We'll see. Okay, so I have a few here. If you need me to, I will give you some options. Okay. If not, if you can just give me the answer, and I think you will. These are pretty easy. Let's start with something like this. Ready? Something simple. Ready? Yeah. Okay. So, in this Genesis platformer from 1995, you could play as Ickis, Crumb, and Oblina. I think I'm pronouncing the names correctly.
Whew.
I can give you options if you
Okay.
if
And
you
it's
really need them.
yeah. Was it exclusive to the Sega platform, or was it available on other?
That's a good question, and I will check really quickly.
Oh,
I don't
can I
think
buy
it
a
was.
vowel?
I don't think it was actually. I could be wrong. It was. Okay. Apparently it
Okay.
was. Yeah.
All right. Well, then I'm ready for if you've got a multiple choice thing here. Maybe I
Okay.
can pull it out of that.
So pay attention. The suspense. Option A, and I have to say it like it's written. So real monsters. That's how you read the name of that game. Option B, Tiny Toon Adventures. Option C, The Lost Vikings.
Okay. Well, my guess was going to be the Lost Vikings, but now I know it's real monsters. I mean, it's real monsters.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you. That's exactly it. Very good. 1 point. Good job. That is indeed the correct answer. So one of yours. One of yours here.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go with another one. Let's go with this. Released in 1992 in the US and published by Mindscape. This Game Gear game lets you select one of 4 playable characters, including Vision and Hawkeye.
It's Captain America, right? Or the Avengers. The Avengers. Yes.
So is
No?
it Captain America? Is
No,
it
it's the Avengers. It's got to be the Avengers. Captain America and the Avengers.
So
All
what's
right.
your final answer?
Well, I do know that Realtime Associates did a port of the arcade version of, if it was called Captain America and the Avengers, and brought it over for Mindscape. So but the exact title I couldn't tell you.
I would go with that if I were you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So yeah, Captain America and the Avengers.
Okay,
Good
very
job.
good.
That's it.
And it's fun to tell people that, oh yeah, I worked on an Avengers game.
Exactly. Exactly.
and
Especially
honestly,
now, right?
we did it. Yeah, we did an Iron Man game too. So okay.
Or just an Iron Man game? Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Not,
Iron Man
not,
and XO on the Saturn. It was
oh,
a
I didn't
Saturn
know that one.
PlayStation release.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, this was.
Okay.
I think by then we were actually rendering the characters in 3D. Not sure,
Hmm.
but the rooms, at least the background and all that, it was a crossover between 2 comic book licenses. It might have been Dark Horse had this character called Man of War,
Hmm.
and Marvel with X-Men. So they might have released some comics where the 2 characters were in the same thing. We did a game. It was for Acclaim, and that was the one on the Saturn and the PlayStation. But it was the one where I think the producer at the time, Dave Bean, was really frustrated because we couldn't take advantage of everything on that the PlayStation had to offer because we needed it also to work on the Saturn. We had,
Mm,
so when we're working with those kinds of problems.
yeah, yeah. Okay, but so we have a right answer and a little more information. That's awesome.
Okay.
Okay, I have another one. Okay. Released in 1993 in the US, this Mega Drive game features stages such as The Forest, Music Town, and The Farm.
Mega Drive?
So a Mega Drive Genesis, right? Yeah. I
Okay.
apologize for, yeah, I'm from Europe, so this is
All
a
right. I'm going to
Genesis
say
game.
Berenstain Bears.
Okay. Would you like to hear the options?
Yes. I'll hear the options now
Okay.
that I've got it wrong.
Okay. So the options are Barney's hide and seek game,
Oh,
B, McDonald's Treasure Land Adventure, C, Mickey's Ultimate Challenge.
all right. Barney. I'm going with Barney. Barney for 500, please, Alex.
It is Barney.
Okay.
So yeah, good job. Okay, let's switch this up a bit. So we've been doing RTA games. Let's do something else. So what I'm gonna tell you here, what I'm gonna use as clues now, are games on the Genesis. Okay,
Okay.
so let's see if we can. This is a classic question here on this show. In this 1992 game, the Earth is being invaded by an alien foe, and it's up to this hero to save his pod and the planet.
Echo the Dolphin.
I believe that you're the first person ever in like 7 years of this show to give me a straight answer, and it's the correct one as well. Well done. It is Echo the Dolphin. I don't think people hear the part about the pod, which could help. But yeah. An alien invasion.
Yeah.
You don't think about dolphins, right?
The pod was the giveaway there. And Ed Annunziata's great storyteller, and all of his games, just brilliant stories.
True. Okay, very good job. Very good. Let's go with a different one now. Okay. Let's go back to the other questions I had here. What's the title of the 1994 Genesis game starring a beach bum who discovers...
All right, I need no more, not a single other clue. Normies, Beach Baby Rama.
That's correct. He discovers a UFO stealing the girls on the beach and sending them to random times in the history of Earth. Of course, as per usual. Speaking of alien invasions, yeah, that's usually what happens. Awesome. Okay, one more.
Please, yeah.
Okay, this platformer, based on an IP by Lucasfilm, was originally released for the Super NES in 1994, and then ported a year later to other systems, including the Game Gear.
Platformer. Yeah, I don't know Lucasfilm games, LucasArts being platformer guys. I mean, if it was an adventure game, I'd say Maniac Mansion. Yeah, adventure, Maniac Mansion. But can you read that one more time?
So the platformer, based on an IP by Lucasfilm, was originally released for the Super NES in 1994, and then ported a year later to other systems, including the Game Gear.
All right, what are my three options?
So, okay. Option A, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Option B, Super Star Wars Return of the Jedi. option C, Back to the Future 3.
Okay. Well, gonna say, well, it's either A or B, but I'm gonna say Star Wars.
Why?
Well, we did do a Game Gear version of Star Wars, one of their movies, but that's the only thing. And I don't remember Indiana Jones being in a platformer, but suppose it was.
I didn't say that, but
Yeah.
I'm just these are just options.
Okay.
Uh, your answer is correct. Yes, Super Star Wars: Return of the Jedi. Yes, on the
Yeah.
Game Gear, developed by RTA.
Yeah. Well, I can do remarkably well when you give me the answers. So that's
Okay, last
yeah.
one. Last
Hmm.
one. We're going take a trip down memory lane to the Saturn days. Okay. And this one is in this game, you play as an insect trying to make it big in Hollywood. I wonder what it is.
Let's see here. I actually have the poster on my wall of the release. There's couple big googly eyes, red shoes, white gloves. Could it be Bug?
Mhm. I don't know. You tell me. Could be, but
Could
is it?
be. All right.
That's correct. Yes, of course. Bug. Well done. Good job. Good
Hey,
job. You
too
did
bad this
great.
wasn't Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. I'd be up at about the $25,000 level at this point.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Maybe next time we'll do one for real money. We'll start a Kickstarter for that. Next time David's on the show, please give us all the money so we can give it to him. Very good job. Thank you. Thank you for playing. Thank you for playing. So let's just go back a little bit to what we were talking about before. So by the way, I skipped the Saturn. It's been told many times on this show. I skipped the Saturn and PlayStation generation altogether because of money and other issues at the time. But I actually had Bug 2. I've played Bug a few years later, but at that time I had Bug 2 on my PC. So it was
Mm,
released for the
mhm.
Sega PC. Bug and Bug 2 were both released for the Sega PC. So I have a very soft spot for Bug 2. But I know both of the games have a lot of puns, which is something that I very much enjoy. Have a great sense of humor. Um, what was the idea behind Bug and the characters, and how did you come up with that? How did you guys come up with that? And
Okay.
what was your
Yeah.
who do you think this would appeal to firstly?
Well, there was, I had two producers at the time, Ann Ladayev and David Bean, and we were having dinner one night. And it was Ann Ladayev who, when we were just knocking around, what kind of characters? Penguin? Who's done a penguin? How about armadillo? No, that's and it was Ann who said, "I know, Bug." And then it just was like, oh, yeah, that makes so much sense. So I got to credit Ann with introducing that into the conversation. And then we gave that over to Jeff Cook, our art director, and Jeff, at first, I don't know if you guys remember the Bloom County cartoon character Bill the Cat. This totally mangy cat that was anti-Garfield. It was just one big bulging eye, one tongue hanging out to the floor. Just this outrageously insipid cat. So our first concepts for Bug were to go with that kind of Bill the Cat kind of thing. He was from the wrong side of the tracks or wrong side of the garden kind of thing. Just this, mangy bug. And we had done a couple of iterations for Jesse Taylor at the time, and he was like, "Nah, this isn't in the mark. Nah, this isn't good. Nah, this isn't Disney enough." So Jeff finally really cleaned up the character. And if this hasn't been brought out before, if you take a look at like big red shoes, Mickey Mouse, white gloves on the hands, Mickey Mouse, two big googly eyes, well, Mickey Mouse has two big googly ears. The idea was to cast it in something that somebody would feel immediately familiar with. Wow, I get it. I can identify with this character because we have for 100 years now. So Bug was different enough, but still familiar enough. So that's where the graphic look came from. And yeah, Jeff was a brilliant artist on that. And incidentally, he did a character study of Bug where he did 8 or 9 expressions, kind of a little character Bible, where he was confused and he was angry and he was devilishly, just all of these expressions. And as I was looking at it, I was saying, this is great, but Jeff, I've seen you make all of those expressions, all of these. Because Jeff was a very expressive guy, but when he looked confused, he would put on this really totally confused face, and there it was on Bug as well. So he was probably very autobiographical in the emotional range that Bug has was all Jeff. And I want to say the story of Bug for me, I was never really a big story guy. I just wanted the story to be 3 words: he just is. I played Mario not caring about the, you're rescuing the princess. It's all about the gameplay and the relationship between the objects and the player. And so that's where my focus was. But everybody else in the project, especially Steve Apur, producer at SEGA, wanted a story beyond that. So the story came from Steve, and then we were dressing all of that up. I got to say, all the humor, the character humor and the puns was all Jeff Cook. He was the character designer. When we were like, okay, let's do this level, he would come up with 8 or 9 sketches of whatever kind of bugs. Incidentally, one of the biggest Saturn honors that I can even remember is that B-52 is one of the characters in Bug, and somebody sent us a picture of street art in New York where somebody had done a mural of B-52, 8 feet by 8 feet kind of thing. And wow, for it to be made into culture or pop culture like that, we were really, really tickled.
That's amazing.
So,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
I not to cut your reasoning there, but I remember, and I still to this day do this. So I love the BHX joke at the beginning of I think both games, but at least Bug 2. So BHX, the bugs are listening. So every time I go see a movie and it's THX, I always whisper to my wife, "The bugs are listening," and she doesn't get it. She doesn't get it. But to this day, it's still something that when I because I at the time I didn't get the joke. Later, wait, oh, I get this now. And so ever since that happened, every time she's like, I don't get it. Yeah.
BHX. The bugs are listening.
Yeah.
Sorry, please do keep going.
Well, that's pretty much it. The sense of humor, the variety of characters, all from Jeff Cook, and then let's see, we had a couple of celebrities who were voicing the characters for us at the time. I want to say, I names escape me, and I don't want to quote the wrong guy.
John Frost.
Yes.
As Bug. Perry Kiefer.
Okay.
Tim
He's
Jones.
one of our artists as well. Tim Jones, one of our artists.
Okay.
Yes.
Those are the only ones I have here.
Okay.
In this
all right.
credits list. Okay.
There may be another one, but I'll have to. I'll follow up on that.
Uncredited, perhaps.
Uncredited, but nationally recognized radio personality, guy who started in radio.
Okay. Excellent.
Well, let's see if our listeners can come up with it. Let's we'll put that out there.
Well, yes.
Which Comedy Central star? Okay.
You're giving more and more clues. Okay. Excellent. So that's awesome, David. All that you guys have done is really, really amazing. I want to bring it back to the present a little bit more now. So, what have you guys been working on? What have you been working on? What do you find interesting in this industry today, for example?
Yeah, well, that's a skip of about 20 years. Um, there was a transition, a very difficult transition Real-Time Associates went through because we were sidled up to SEGA. Once it was obvious they were losing the console wars, there was a time when two-thirds of the work in our studio was canceled within a 30-day window. I had 100 employees, and all of a sudden 70 of them were unemployed, which started a kind of a precipitation. We unfortunately let go of some of the lower performing staff, which made the higher performing staff get nervous and leave. So we really were stuck with a core crew of very dedicated people. But because we'd also been known to do a lot of children's games, weren't getting opportunities on the new consoles as they came out because they were very core games, very
Hmm.
driven and all that. So I'd say that we're doing casual games as we could, and then or family friendly games, which wasn't really the driving genre to get you on the beginning of a platform. Then after a couple of years, they'd say, "Yeah, well, you haven't done anything on the PlayStation 2, so where are we going to go with that?" So we kind of rode with our passion of the kinds of products we wanted to do rather than what the market opportunity were. But in doing so, gravitated away from these mainstream releases with the 200-person teams and all that now. So we've been doing a lot of prototyping and games for health. It's a way for us to bring game technology to different markets or to make a difference in the world. But even skipping much more recently, for the last maybe 5 or 6 years, I've been working on a location-based entertainment format. So what's interesting to me is taking new technologies and bringing them together using interactivity and entertainment to come up with products that have never been done before. So even if you look back at Bug, okay, nobody had done a quad scroller at that time. Here's new technology. Let's figure out something we can do with that. So I still feel that what we're looking at now is taking new technologies that aren't necessarily even gaming platforms and making entertainment experiences out of them. We had pioneered a location-based kind of a virtual reality entertainment system without the VR headsets, where people could
Okay.
see each other in a theater, a small theater, maybe 30 feet across, 20 feet across, see each other and be immersed in interactive 3D graphics. So I've been pursuing that very deliberately for about 5 years pre-COVID, but then getting groups of strangers together indoors and asking them to interact with each other at close quarters. Didn't
Yeah.
really, that's been shelved for the time being. Again, with taking interactivity, technology, visualizations, and all that. More recently, in the last couple of years, we're working in what I would call holographic telepresence, which, well, what is that? Well, it's the Princess Leia moment in Star Wars, recreating characters in 3D using
Okay.
traditionally 2D devices or capture devices, and
Hmm.
um, the kinds of things we're working on is still interactive, can be entertainment, can be utilitarian, but basically for the last year or two, specializing in forward-looking technologies, things like recreating 3D characters out of 2D imagery, facial reconstruction, automatic lip sync. So what we're doing is looking at what technologies are being expressed in the future and bringing them into products and entertainment experiences now, but more as custom products. There's nothing really consumer level
Yeah.
in any of
Hmm.
this now, but it still kind of feeds that desire of, well, what hasn't anybody done yet? Well, let's do it.
Yeah. And if you make it happen, it could be explored
Yeah.
for a consumer market as well
Yeah.
in the future. Yeah, that makes
Yes.
sense.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Have you been, taking a look at what's out there in terms of video games and the that part of entertainment, or have you been a little bit up, apart from that since you're working on other things?
Well, As a consumer, I still enjoy video games, but I find that the time they take to really explore exceeds my ability to immerse myself in them.
Mm.
Big fan of, say, for example, No Man's Sky. All right, I've got it and love to play it. It's a computer game more than a console. I get that, but to really explore that would just take eons. And as much as I appreciate it, that as far as the consoles out there now, I'll take a look at the big games that come out, the big franchises. But again, I don't have the dexterity or the patience to be able to work my way through a 60-hour campaign. And I'm such an amateur at online campaigns that I wouldn't try to get into a Call of Duty or anything like that. Anyway, those types of games don't really interest me.
Mhm.
Shout out to Untitled Goose Game. It hits my sweet spot. It's hilarious, simple to play, not epic. Um, uh,
It
or
is. It is in its own right. It's epic in its own right. Yeah,
Yeah.
in a
Okay.
different way.
Very good. In a different vein,
Yeah,
Journey I've probably played 5 times through because it's just so
it's amazing.
evocative, and the music is great, and it's also a very short play. So,
Yeah, yeah.
um,
And even it has that cooperative play if you
yeah,
wanted to. If you
yes,
somehow find other players, it's something really really special. I agree.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So would you see yourself coming back to the video game industry, so to speak? So would you see yourself working on a game these days if it was something different, or which genre
Well,
would you like to
it's
work on?
I'd want to say that the experiences I've had in the last 10 or 15 years are what I see happening in the indie genre. I mean, the design ethos expressed in independent games now, small teams, medium-sized teams, um, uh, that I'll leave it. I might have an idea that I could express that way, but I don't have either the team or the command over. Let's make something that's happened. So I think what the indies are doing is great, and I don't think I could either compete or try to handle that market because it still requires promotion and marketing. And then if I were to look at maybe collaborating with an indie team of either the production or the prioritization of assets and where do we throw you know, if anything, I feel that I might still be qualified in that role. But then there's teams now doing retro games like
Hmm.
Tommy Tallarico's Rebirth of the Intellivision Amico. And I look at that and that's still too new school for my old school stuff. So I almost feel like if I were going to do an original game, I would do an 8K game or 4K game as they were originally programmed because nobody can do that. Or nobody would want to have the patience to do that. So um, I want to keep a hand in entertainment. Of course, music slash interactive products, a big fascination for me.
Hmm.
And I may have a way to express myself as far as music gameplay goes in ways that we haven't seen yet. So if so, it would still then be in some sort of something that hasn't been expressed yet, or a way to express it in a new way. So I appreciate asking, but I don't see myself in a return to consumer entertainment software. But certainly the passion for this location-based technology that we've
Hmm.
pioneered, and then music interactivity. There may be stuff there, but gosh, getting through the noise. There's just
That's true.
so much stuff out there.
Yeah. You're a trailblazer, so you're probably just coming up with the technology and uses for technology that we'll use for playing video games in the years to come. So
Well, that would be fun. We did a lot of our own engines before there were game engines out there. We did that, and I did license my audio drivers to a number of people who were like, I don't know how to make music on this system. Oh, here, use this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Awesome. Let's say you were approached by Sega or by whoever is wanting to do that with proposition to bring back one of your old IPs. Would
Oh, well,
you
yeah.
would you be up to letting it go and letting go of it and saying, okay, here it is, you have the rights, just you know do something, let me see what it is, let me give my okay, and you can knock yourself out.
Well, oddly enough, we don't have control. Most of the games we've done are licensed, so we don't have the rights to the characters.
Okay.
And this weird thing happened, getting back to Bug and how it was supposed to be a Sonic game. The contract read they owned the character in the IP. And then when we switched it over to Bug, it wasn't until a few months later that I said, oh, wait a second. Yeah, it's an original game with us. We've done all this character design work, but we don't own the characters because of this accident in the contract. And when I brought it up to Sega's management at the time, they said, "Well, pretty much tough. No, you can't have
Yeah.
IP. We've got it. We need it. It's valuable. It's ours. Ha ha." And but as I kept exploring and pushing, they said, "Well, honestly, if you came to us with an original game character that we didn't own on the Saturn, we probably would have turned you down." So on the one hand, it was a way for us to get our creative work out there. On the other hand, we don't control that particular IP as much as we created it. But
Yeah.
If Sega came back and said, "Hey, we want to get the Bug team, let's get the crew back together," or something like that, yeah, I'd have a blast with that, absolutely. And there may be ways that we could express it that haven't been done before, but. So we
Yeah.
had a handful of IPs that I'd be interested in doing. Incidentally, Mindstrike, that training product I did for Intellivision in the mid '80s, in the early '80s, I still have rights to that one, and
Okay.
would do that too.
Isn't it coming back for the Amico? Is it the Amico? Yeah.
I don't think that'll be on the Amico.
No. Okay.
If it is, it'll be a port of the original game. Actually, I've seen some. Cover artwork that I approved, but my feeling was it was a re-release of the original. But
Mm.
if it is on the Amico, hey, I'll
No,
play
I
that.
was just asking.
Yeah,
I'm not in the know, so
yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. What do you think? So you mentioned Bug. Where do you think people could, or you could, make Bug go in 2021 or 2022, whatever? What would you see you guys, your original team, doing with the character and the franchise
Wow. There'd be so
in
much
this
to
day
do
and
with that.
age?
Yeah. Great question. Well, I mean, permission aside, if we had the ability to do that, I think what we'd want to do is keep it a very kind of in the same vein of lighthearted, light action stuff. I might go with algorithmically generated content, kind of like your endless runners,
Hmm.
where you don't have to create what's called this content treadmill. Um, where the game is only as good as many assets as you can throw at it, to come up with a way that somebody could play it for 20, 30, 40, 50 hours without having 20, 30, 40, 50 hours of artists cranking out new sprites, new characters, and all that. So that might be the way I'd either treat or pitch that. Um,
Hmm.
um, yeah, and actually, I found the archive discs. I thought they were lost for 10 years. They're on some format of a disc that doesn't even a disk drive that doesn't even exist anymore. Uh, but I've got the original source code here now. I just can't read it.
Okay. That's the next step. Then
Yeah, yeah,
hold on to it.
yep.
Awesome. Yeah, because there is a lot of interest for older IPs, for retro gaming. There has been a renaissance of of retro games and retro IPs. I was thinking, as I was asking the question, I was thinking of Toe Jam and Earl,
Mm.
right?
Oh
Because
yeah,
it's which
yeah,
is a little bit
reboots.
older
Yeah,
than Bug, but
sure.
it turns 30 this year,
Hmm.
and they were able to get a Kickstarter going and fund a new game a few years ago. Um,
That's right. Yeah,
do
absolutely.
you think there would still be interest in Bug to an extent that maybe people
I
would
think Toe
support it
Jam
and
Earl might have made a bigger splash than Bug at the time. I'm not sure what the community would look like to support a Bug, a Real Time Associate slash Bug. If we got the old band
Mhm.
together like in the Blues Brothers, Jeff Cook's still out there. Um, Greg Turner, composer, still out there. Actually, worked with Tim Jones, one of the artists, just last year.
Okay.
So it'd be possible. The I don't know if that it's worth me reaching out to Sega and saying, hey,
Mhm.
will you let me have fun with this, and I'll cut you in, or whether or not they would be more restrictive to it. It's again, would absolutely love to do that, but so much of making a game now is either the marketing or the getting the community going, and that's a component that we never had at Real Time Associates, and doesn't interest me personally. If maybe one of our team members was we'll get the word out, don't worry. That's what it would take, because
Mhm.
it's my interest being in design and
The
production,
creative
and
process.
the creative process rather than the creative
Mhm.
process with a community.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if a enthusiastic community manager said, hey, I got this, you do that, and then there's
Mhm.
the collaboration that way. There'd be a conversation to have there, and that'd be a lot of fun to explore what it would take, and what kind of audience
Mhm.
we could see with that.
Excellent. So, listeners, just
Yeah.
the ball's on your court. Okay, so David, it was really a blast to have you on the show. I don't want to keep you much longer, but there is one question that I always ask my guests every time. So, are you familiar with the concept of blast processing?
Blast processing?
Yeah. So,
No, I mean,
is
not
it?
not by that term, but
Yeah. So it was a term that Sega of America came up with to promote the
ah,
Genesis.
okay,
Okay.
then very yes, I believe I
Yes.
know what it is. And again, it was Jesse Taylor who told me about this with Sonic, and he said the speed that Sonic runs is exactly as fast as the 68,000 can refresh the background as it's moving at its maximum speed. So if that's what blast programming is, if not, that
Yeah.
certainly was a
Yeah, so
yeah.
the marketing team came up with this to compare the Genesis with the Super NES and the Nintendo consoles. So it was much faster. So
Mhm.
is it a real thing though? We there are conflicting opinions, but the question is this: if there was indeed blast processing, if that was a real thing, and if you could add blast processing to anything in the world, what would it be and why?
Mm.
To make it more powerful, faster, better, I don't know. Anything in
Yeah,
the
I
world.
mean, geez. If you're opening it up outside of even entertainment, maybe my Bitcoin farming would go faster. I don't know. The and I do think it's a real thing. I think that between the 68,000 and the access they had to the video chip, that they were able to move a lot more pixels a lot more quickly than they were on other consoles. Just thinking about my own familiarity with the architecture, but it would be a software technique, blast
Mhm.
processing. Um, oh, geez, games are running fast enough for me. So yeah, I'm let's blast process our way into electric vehicles faster than we I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, and let's try to make find a way to make them make any kind of noise so I don't get run over on the street as I
Yeah.
almost usually do when I find an electric car.
Right.
Yeah,
Sidecar.
exactly. Okay, so that's it. That's a good answer. There's no wrong or right answer here. With
Right.
blast processing, anything goes. David, anything you'd like to say to the fans of your games and to the people who, to the old school gamers like me that still
Yeah.
remember Bug and all the things that you worked on in the past?
Well, just that I'm really appreciative of the interest of that era, and I'm always excited when people want to look back and say, what were things like back then, or yeah, we've got all of these assets now, but what was it like before? I'm really appreciative of the interest in that era, and then either how things were made, or what the stories were, what the social climate was like in that era, as well as what the technical climate was like. So I'm just very appreciative that people find interest in that. There's one catchphrase I have, which is, I'm part of the Big Bang of video game development. And what do I mean by that? I mean, like, the farther you go back in time, the more likely you are to see me. But as the universe just expands and expands and expands, yeah. But just keep going back, and there's his name again. Oh, there's his name. But so I really am, thankful and appreciative of the interest of this era, and yeah, and it'd be fun to see how that gets expressed in either the indie game market or people that do a lot of retro games, a lot of
Mhm.
16-bit retro inspired games. Love it. Keep it up, guys.
Yeah. So I'm sure we'll get to talk again soon when we get Barney's Hide and Seek game HD on the PS5 and Xbox
Please,
Series
normies.
X.
Let's do normies.
Barney's.
That's a story in and of itself. But
A couple of years ago, I had a different show on Radio Sega, and I did an ad, a fake ad for like a campaign. Like, I don't know, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Shenmue, a Dreamcast game that the
Mhm.
fans were able to bring back with the support of the community, and they ended up getting a new game in the series. So I tried to fake start a campaign for getting Barney's Hide and Seek adventure or game HD. So like with a social media hashtag. It wasn't very successful, but I'm sure we'll get there soon, and or maybe Bug 3.
Mm.
Although, how could you make a pun with Bug 3? I don't know. Uh,
I'll ask Jeff.
yes, and with just like Bug 2, all the
All right.
references to different movies and stuff, that would be awesome. But yeah, so David, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for coming on the Sega Lounge. All the best for your current and future endeavors.
All right.
And we'll talk soon.
Yeah, thanks. Been great talking with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And that's it for my chat with David Warhol. Believe me, there was a lot more to talk about, but I hope you guys enjoyed all the stories he shared with us. It truly was an honor to have Mr. Warhol on the show. But now it's time to say goodbye. We have a lot of great shows coming up as we wrap up season 6 of this show in the next few weeks. Can you believe it's November already? Yeah. To stay up to date with all lounge happenings, remember to follow the podcast on your podcatcher of choice and follow us on social media. We're at the Sega Lounge on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have an amazing week, and be sure to come back next week. Bye-bye. The Sega Lounge, hosted by me, KC, and part of Radio Sega's network of live shows and podcasts. Theme song and incidental music by OSC. Find them at opussciencecollective.bandcamp.com. Got any suggestions? Drop me an email to podcast@thesegalounge.com. Follow us on Twitter @thesegalounge and like us at facebook.com/thesegalounge. You can find previous episodes of the show by going to thesegalounge.com and wherever fine podcasts are downloaded. A Mixed On Productions podcast.